The Chitrik Academy is dedicated in loving memory of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chitrik.
Welcome to the Chitrik Academy. Today we are going to give a short introduction to the Gemara. Before we discuss the Gemara, let us discuss a little bit about the Mishnah. The Mishnah, the Mishnayos, was written in the year 200 of the secular year in Eretz Yisrael by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. This was right after the time of the Churban by Sheni, after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, and Rebbe realized that it was important to write down all the discussions about the halacha which they had learned all the way from Matan Torah, from Mount Sinai. He compiled them and called it the Mishnah, the Mishnayos. 300 years later, close to the year 500 of the secular year, the Gemara was compiled by Ravina and Ravashi. They were the end of a group of people called the Amirayim. The Amirayim were after the Mishnayos, and they would discuss and explain the Mishnayos, the Mishnah. So Ravina and Ravashi compiled all their discussions into the Gemara. So this is what you can see on the map. The year 200 of the secular year is when the Mishnah was written. The Gemara was completed in the year 500, and we're 2013. During the times of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who is also called Rebbe for short, so he compiled and he wrote the Mishnayos, the Mishnah. He had a student named Reb Chia who compiled other brises, other Mishnahs which were not mentioned by Rebbe, and he called them brises. So let's just write this over here. There's the brises, which was written by his student Reb Chia. Let's write this down, Reb Chia. Now, what was the purpose of the Gemara over the Mishnah? So let us see. In general, there's around 4 reasons given for the purpose of the Gemara. Number 1 is to explain the cases and explain the reasons for the halachas mentioned in the Mishnah. Number 2 is to determine who the halacha follows like, because different times we have in the Mishnah, it could be a machlokes, and the Gemara will explain who the halacha follows. The third reason that is given is because there are many gzeiros, many decrees and takanos enacted by the chachamim, by our sages, after the times of the Mishnah, different customs that were added to our tradition, and these are recorded in the Gemara because they came after the time of the Mishnah, and they're therefore not recorded in the Mishnah. A fourth thing which is added in the Gemara is additionally to explaining the halacha and explaining the Mishnah, or saying other decrees and other customs that the Jewish people accept upon themselves. It also has what's called agadis, which are different stories of what happened to our sages, or many times it explains different concepts that are written in the Torah, not necessarily halacha, but explains different psukim and different stories that happened to our sages in order that we can learn lessons from them. Many times the Gemara will be discussing one thing and may sidetrack to another idea. It may explain halacha and then tell us a story about one of our sages to bring out this point. And this is common in the Gemara, that it could go from one path and cross over to another one. The setup of the Gemara is that there are a lot of questions and answers, as well as many arguments and proofs when they're discussing the Gemara. The common people who argue are the Amirayim. Now, there are common people who argue with each other. For example, there is Abaye and Rava. They argue with each other all the time, especially those who are going to be learning El Messias. Right in the beginning, we have a machlokes of Abaye and Rava. Another example of 2 Amirayim that argue with each other often are Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. They were actually brother-in-laws. Another group is Rav and Shmuel. And there's Rabba and Rav Zera. There are many other groups. However, these are a few of the groups which are very common, and they are quoted many times in Gemara. Who the halacha follows, there are actually different rules who the halacha follows, which the Gemara discusses. We hold like Abaye in certain cases, specific cases, and Rav in other cases. as well as Rav and Shmuel and all the others as well. The rule is that an Ameira, all these people who were after the times of the Mishnah are called Ameirayim. Those who are in the times of the Gemara are called, like we just mentioned, are called Ameirayim. And those who are in the times of the Mishnah were called Tanoim. Tanoim are the ones that were in the times of Mishnayos. They were the Tana, they were the ones who taught the Mishnah, the laws of the Mishnah. The rule is that an Ameira cannot argue with the words of a Tana. We consider the words of the Tanoim, those from previous generation, because we hold that they are greater Torah scholars than us, so we cannot argue with their words. So many times we can find in the Gemara that if there's an argument, they either try to base their opinions on the Tanoim. So each one may choose a Tana which he sees he could go according to their opinion, and many times they would ask on each other questions from a Mishnah. If they find a Mishnah that Tana says not like their fellow, they may quote the Mishnah to prove that the halacha does not follow the person who argues with them. And in that case, the other person may try to find another Tana that they could tag onto and hold according to their opinion. Now, when getting to more of the technical part of the Gemara, when the Gemara, because there are a lot of questions and answers, there are different terms that are generally used, common question openers, common question terms, that when you see this in the Gemara, you know, a question is coming up. Because in the Gemara, there aren't any periods or commas, and a person sort of needs to get used to it. Most of these things, in order to know where the Gemara begins and where the Gemara ends, as well as to pick up on the style of the Gemara, and of course to understand the language of Aramaic, comes with a lot of practice and experience, and nowadays there are a lot of tools out there to help. However, this is very important to know, common question openers, common terms that the Gemara uses when it wants to ask a question. So generally, let's start from this side. If the Gemara will be asking a question from a Mishnah, for example, if someone says a statement and there's a Mishnah which says the opposite, it'll start off with Tanan. It says in a Mishnah. So generally when it says Tanan, it means the Gemara is going to be asking a question from a Mishnah. If it wants to ask from a Brisa, which we mentioned is also from a Tana, it's from Reb Chia, the student of Rebbe, then it would generally start off as Tanya, Itmar, Tani. So when you see any of these phrases in the Gemara, it's an opener for a question. So beware. The term Tashma, which is also a term used to open up a question that it could be used either to open up a question for a Brisa or a Mishnah. Tashma is also that we're asking a question that seems like a contradiction from somewhere else. So this column over here is when the Gemara wants to ask a question from a different place. If the Gemara wants to ask a question from a Mishnah, for example, it seems that the Ameir's opinion contradicts that of a Mishnah, it will start with Tanan. If it's from a Brisa, then it would start off with Tanya, Itmar, or Tani, or it could choose to start off Tashma, which would mean from either as well. So if you see any of these words, it means the Gemara is about to ask a question from either a Mishnah or a Brisa. Here are other terms that are used, and if you see this in Gemara, you also should be aware that the Gemara is starting to ask a question. One is Masiv, another one is Ibaya Lehu. Ibaya means a question. So Ibaya Lehu also means that they're going to ask now, which generally someone from the yeshiva is asking. Or Bayimine, generally someone could be asking someone else a question, is Bayimine. Meisvei, although Meisvei would be for a Mishnah or Brisa as well. Eisvei is also a term used as a question. Maskif and Raminu. So this is just a general rule. You should know that when you see these, it means stop the Gemara. We're starting a new piece that we're asking a question on what we just learned. And then you can see where the question is and work from there what the answer is. There are exceptions when it says Tanya and it means an answer, but those are the exceptions to the rules, and Rashi on the page generally points that out, that Tanya b'nichusa, it means in a calm way not to ask a question. So this is just a short introduction to the study on the Gemara, and we hope you enjoy. Good luck on your journey.